Hey everyone, this is Grover from PhotoShelter, and we have Corey Rich on the line. We're calling him visual storyteller. That's what he is, but he's a he's a madman. I mean, look at him in this ladder. What do you, Corey? What's up with the ladder?
You
I mean,
know,
that is
this,
scary. I would be so scared.
I think this is the most creative use of the ladder from my garage that we've ever managed to pull off. This is in Joshua Tree National Park. This photo was shot, and we were doing the launch for the Nikon D4. Actually, we were shooting a short film called Y, and a set of still images that corresponded with the video content. But really, I'm kind of always striving for, I think we all are always striving for new and unique angles. So we took this little ladder called the Little Giant, broke every rule in the instruction manual, and strapped it to the side of a cliff. But it did create a unique angle. And so
Yeah,
sometimes it's always a balancing act, literally and figuratively, of what do you get out
yeah.
of pushing yourself.
Well, for those of you who don't know who Corey is, and I think there's like four people left in the world, um, he is a climbing expert and a photography expert. So he has been able to take his two passions, bring them together, and create a really amazing career that's extremely fulfilling. And I get jealous of him sometimes. Um, but digging a little deeper. So you grew up in California, and I guess what, did you start at an early age, just shooting adventure and sports?
I did it. When I was 13 years old, I went rock climbing for the first time and fell in love with everything about rock climbing. And I wanted to bring that weekend adventure back to the playground and share it with my buddies. And I learned that just an oral story was not enough. I needed visual proof. And so I borrowed my dad's SLR camera and realized immediately that it turns out it's not just the piece of equipment, but it's how you use it. It's how you engage with the piece of equipment to make powerful storytelling images. And so two parallel passions were born. I really was passionate about being outside and having adventures, but then trying to document those adventures with a camera. And over time, I went off to college. I worked at the local newspaper, and then I went to college for photojournalism. Admired guys like Brad Mangan at San Jose State in the Bay Area who had made a career out of photography. And I really went down that editorial road. I was working for newspapers, started doing magazine assignments. And partway through college, I realized my passion was not to be a newspaper journalist, but instead it was to tell outdoor adventure stories. And so I really began to apply all of the things and the techniques that I had learned working in the newspaper world, both at the Antelope Valley Press and the Modesto Bee, to documenting adventure. And I always had this philosophy, which was if I made great pictures, I could always find a home for those pictures. And it turned out to be true then, and it's still true now. Great pictures find a home, whether editorially or commercially.
Yeah,
And
I
the
think, I mean, the fact that you do what you love really it comes through. I mean, it's very, very obvious, and I think it's your competitive advantage, you know?
Well, it's definitely I never set out to be a businessman. I never had a business plan for how I was in year one going to sell pictures, in year two and assignments, what the revenue splits would be. It was always just 100% love and be passionate about what I'm doing every single day and push harder, push harder, push harder, make better pictures, more pictures. And it's that formula, though it seems so simplistic the way I describe it, has it's really, I think, the formula for success in the photography or in the creative world. It's be creative, work hard, and love what you do. And uh,
Right.
and that really brings me to standing on that ladder in that first frame. I get to spend a lot of time in crazy places, being passionate about what I do.
Right. So you're a Nikon shooter, and you spend an average of 250 days per year
Yeah,
on.
and I think that 250, that's pretty accurate. If you ask my wife right now, she might argue that I'm underestimating the number of days on the road at 250 this year. I think we might break a record. Um, I think we might go close to 300 this year. And but the good news is my wife and I travel a lot together, probably 50% of the time
Oh,
at
that's great.
least. Otherwise, I'd be a bachelor.
Like there's some pretty cool locations too, I'm sure.
Pretty great, pretty great. I think that's one of the biggest perks of this job. It's the people that I get to work with and the places that we go. Those are really the perks.
Right. Well, one of those places was New Mexico. I don't know how long you spent there, but you produced a commercial that for the, what is it, the New Mexico Tourism Board, or State of New
Correct.
Mexico Tourism.
Yep. 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 State of New Mexico.
And so what I want to do, and I don't know if this is going to fly here through GoToWebinar, if it can handle it, but you produced a commercial. It's 1 minute long, and I want to see if I can show it through right through here. It may be jumpy, it may be jittery. If it looks like crap, it's not Corey's fault. It's mine. And it's a minute long, and won't, if it doesn't work out, we'll just sit tight, and then we'll talk about it more in a minute. Okay. You see that?
Yes, we just saw the Vimeo player pop up. That's great.
Oh, cool. So far, so good. Let me try playing it.
We are all travelers. We seek what is true, and we push past what we know to be false. The question is, where do we go? What place is true and good and real? Where is the place that will speak to us, crystal clear, in a voice that is familiar and kind? Where is true found and false forgotten? Where? New Mexico. True.
Great.
Well, I don't know how jumpy that looked or or what, but we are recording this, and we'll have it up on the blog.
And what I would encourage everyone, that it was pretty jumpy, at least on my end. It was sort of, rather than seeing 24 frames per second, we were seeing one. But I think it at least gives everyone a taste of roughly what this looked like. And everyone can visit Vimeo and watch both the 60-second version as well as the two 30-second cut downs that we did, and really kind of pull it apart. But I think our goal is, it's more from 10,000 feet above today. Let's talk about how a piece like this comes together,
Right.
and then you can watch it over and over if you want.
Okay. Cool. So let's get started. And I mean, it told the story. I think it told a story about, in a commercial. So let's talk about that. Like all the things that go into telling a complete story with video. This is something, I grew up, went to school as a still photographer, and there's some different things to think of, like when you're doing, well, obviously you do know the differences between still and video. So
Sure, sure.
I'm anxious to
And,
hear your answers.
and I know some of what I'm going to say. I know there's folks listening to this talk that are at varying levels, from just delving into video to those that are very experienced, that know more than I do on the telephone. And so, some of this information will be at the low level and at the high level. But I think at the core level, it's still storytelling. We're trying to communicate something. We're trying to tell a story. And I always start with any project that I'm working on, whether it's a still photo shoot, whether it's a video project. I really like, if I can't answer the question, what is the story, in a sentence or two, it's already a disaster. I'm starting off on the wrong foot. In thinking about motion, we really have 6 elements that we work with. We have 3 visual elements. We have still imagery, we have video content, and we have graphics and animation. That's what's going to fill the screen. We have a rectangle, which is now our computer monitor. and or the television set, and we get to decide what visuals we put up there. And we have this other component, which is sound, and it's really simple. We have music, we have ambient or natural sound, and we have voice. And so early on in the discussion about these television spots, we really go through the list. It's kind of the most baseline foundation checklist of what elements, what media do we want to work with to to create these spots. And so we went through the checklist. Do we want still photographs in the spot? No, we wanted it to be completely video. So okay, it's all video. Check. Are there going to be graphics and animation? Yes. At some point we need to see New Mexico true, the concept come up on screen. Then we go to the sound checklist. Is there going to be music? Yes, this is going to be a very inspirational music-driven spot. Are we going to hear natural or ambient sound? And to be clear, natural or ambient sound would be, for example, when the bike rider rides past the camera, do you hear the dirt flying up? Do you hear the tire crunching on the sand? And we decided in 30 seconds we don't have time to really use natural sound if we're going to have dominant music in the background. And then the most important driving piece of the narrative was going to be voice. There was going to be voiceover that was read over the top of the visuals and over the top of the music. So there it is, right from the get-go. Before we ever went into the field, we knew the ingredients that we were going to work with, the type of media that we would work with. This is just another one of those baseline, before you go out and shoot, my advice is there's always a production document. The instant I start talking about a project in my office, the first thing we do is start a production document. And you can call it a production document, you can call it a production book, it can be one page, or it can be a binder with 100 pages in it. And the bigger the project, the bigger the binder, the more the information. But that document at a baseline level is a summary of what you're doing, what story are you trying to tell. It's a schedule and a map of what you're trying to accomplish. You know, in the example of New Mexico, we actually had the narrative script, right? We wrote the script. The ad agency wrote the script. So I knew what the words were going to be. And I described they were road trips. The concept for this spot was two different road trip scenarios. One was a family on the road from a surrounding state, traveling through New Mexico, enjoying the experience, having an adventure. The other was a couple on the road doing a road trip through New Mexico. So there it is. There's my two storylines. Couple on a road trip, family on a road trip, having adventure, discovering authentic, true New Mexico through food, through hiking, through water, through driving on roads, meeting locals, experiencing local culture.
Now,
And
did they come
then
to you with the idea already like half baked, or was it something that you the whole
you know,
idea
the,
came from you,
the
or?
yeah, it was a really, really talented shop and group of creatives out of Austin, Texas. Vendor is the name of the agency. And by the time they came to me, they had a pretty good feel for the idea that it was a road trip, but there were still a lot of questions around um, what would the point of view of the road trip be. For example, we explored the idea of maybe it's the girl shooting the guy and the guy shooting the girl, and it's the mom shooting the kids. So you would never, there was no external person shooting. You would feel like it was a homemade movie. So we did a lot of exploration and discovery around what would be the most creative approach to doing this, what would give us the most production value, what would portray New Mexico in the most compelling way. And so I would say that the idea was 70% developed by the time the agency came to me, explained what they wanted to do, and then we collaborated to get at that final 30% or
Did you have a
25%.
previous relationship with this agency? Like,
You know, no, I didn't. And in fact, I always like to say that I feel like each job that we do, that I do, is we get it because of the last job we did. I mean, it turns out everything in our career is a stepping stone. It's, you know, one door opens and that leads to the next door. And that photograph of me hanging off the ladder in Joshua Tree National Park, the first slide we all saw today, that was for the Nikon D4 release video. And the agency saw the Y video, Nikon D4 release, and they liked Y, but then they watched How of Why, which is the behind the scenes making of video. And they
Okay.
really loved our approach. It was this, my methodology is always small footprint production where a light and fast crew, everyone on the small crew is handpicked because they wear multiple hats. We're a great team. We get along well. We can sit in vans, planes, and trains and tents together for 20 hours at a time without driving each other crazy and be passionate about the mission. And they really loved that aspect of how we approached shooting Y. And they wanted us to bring that same production model, that same philosophy to shooting these New Mexico spots and create that gritty, raw, authentic look to the footage.
Okay, cool. Cool.
So moving, I'll just rip through this production document. We really try to schedule our time. We had 4 days to actually shoot, and we really tried to budget where were we going to be in the morning, how many hours would we spend at that location, what would our travel time be from that first location to the next location, and really down to the minute. Like we want to make every minute count from an hour before sunrise until an hour after sunset. One of the realities in production is you don't get to sleep much. So you try to log your sleep time before you start shooting, and then you pass out in the aftermath. There was always a shot list, and that's just literally everything that I want to shoot. We had no storyboards on this project. That's really important. There were no sketches of every scene we were going to shoot. 2 weeks before doing the shoot, or 3 weeks before the shoot, I flew into New Mexico, and the creative director and I, Dave Stanton, we spent 3 days driving around New Mexico, going to all of the locations that we thought were most appropriate. And at each of those locations, it was sort of like a blank white canvas. He and I would dream up scenarios that we could envision shooting. We're in a slot canyon, and I would say, boy, I can envision the kids running through this slot canyon like they're an airplane, and mom and dad behind. And then, wow, maybe farther up the canyon, I see the couple, kind of turning the corner and seeing this vast, wide open canyon, and it's a jib shot. And so I'm writing all of this down, and I'm brainstorming every detail that I might shoot, because it's not just about the kids flying through the canyon, but then I want reverse angles. I want details of their feet running through the sand. If we're going to use a piece of special equipment, a steady cam, a jib, a slider, for example, a helicopter, this is where I'm making those notes.
Do you think about time of day, like where the sun is and stuff like that?
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. In that shot list, I'm always making notes like AM, PM, noon, just to keep my mind remember when would we want to schedule this location. Because oftentimes it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. We've looked at 20 locations. 3/4 of them would be best in the morning. The other quarter would be best in the evening, but we have an equal number of mornings and evenings. And so it's a lot of moving pieces around, moving locations around, and trying to be at the right place at the right time and compromising where possible. I also use an iPhone app a lot for location scouting. And so I'll just drop a GPS pin, which will remind me exactly where we are and also what the sunrise, sunset time will be at that location when we're shooting. And I think
That's
it's
cool.
just sunrise, sunset, I believe is the name of the app. And there's a,
Wow.
or,
So
or
there really
sun,
there's really an app for that. Oh, awesome.
there's a bunch of amazing apps for scouting locations and keeping track of when the sun's going to come up and where it's going to be in the sky. Interview questions. In this case, there were no interview questions, so we just breeze over that. But I did put the script into the production document. Even during the scout, I always want to be able to refer to what is the viewer going to be hearing on their television set when we're seeing these visuals. Crew list is pretty important. I touched on that. I'm really adamant about working with the people that I'm comfortable working with. I mean, there's no I in team. And when you get into the video world, even at this level, which is still a pretty low level, it's all about having the right people around you. I'm one piece of that equation. I'm directing the spot, but every person on this team really counts. And that crew list, it's who they are, what their role is, and all of their contact information. Because inevitably someone gets lost while you're driving around on production and you don't have their phone number in your phone, and so it becomes a disaster if they don't have a list of contact info. And then there's the B word, which is the least fun, and that's the budget. It's dreaming, trying to do the most creative things possible, but keeping it in check with the budget, making sure that we're not overspending on our dreams, trying to make things look really creative. And so I'll always have the budget. Maybe not every crew member sees the budget. Certainly, whoever's producing the job would have the budget, and I'll always have the budget in my pocket so that if I have a panic attack, that we just spent a lot of money, I can take a quick look and hopefully realize we were okay.
Well, I mean, this talk of budget for me, I wonder, this is a personal question, I guess, but maybe other people have it as well. Like, how do you price all this? You know, and ahead of time, you have to have arranged a deal, signed a contract with the client, and coming up with a budget for production is part of that, and coming up with what you're going to be paid and all the people in the crew are going to get paid. That's all factored in. I mean, how does
Right.
that work?
Well, I mean, and it's also safe to say that we bid on this job. There was no, just because they liked my work, they liked what we did with Y, and they liked the feel of our crew. It looked like we had fun and we produced the goods. We still had to bid on the job. So we did a handful of discovery calls. I learned as much as I could about the job. I spent a lot of time thinking about the job, talking to the guys in my office. I'm a co-owner of Novus Select, which is a production company out of New York City. And we work a lot with Novus Select to bid our jobs. We have 3 assignment reps in New York, and they're the experts. Like, they look at numbers and put together estimates every single day. And the consequences in working with a production company or a rep, the good news is you have an expert that's advocating for you, that's really putting those numbers together. They're paying attention to sourcing crew, sourcing equipment all over the country. They're my advocate and representative. What I give is a percentage of my creative fees to that agency, to the production company, in order to negotiate on my behalf. And it's always that fine line of trying to be realistic about what do I need budget-wise to do this job at the level I want to do it, meet the expectations of the client, and make the money that I think I deserve and what my rep believes they can actually demand for my time. And
Right, right. So
and so
if the budget goes over, you know, you're on the scene and the budget goes over for some unforeseen consequences or something happens, is that coming out of your pocket, or is that something that you go back to the client like, hey, you know, let's meet halfway, or is it something?
yeah, that's a good point. So usually they would approve the budget in advance. They say, Corey, you've been awarded the job. Your budget seems reasonable. So they sign off on the budget. Our job at that point, my crew, my producer and I, our job is to stay within that budget. Now, when situations change or we end up on location and it turns out the creative director and the client really want to push the limits, and we want, I'm just making this up, but we want to stay later at a location, and that's going to cost an extra $2,000 to keep a Park Service ranger with his car and the gate open, then we turn to the client and say, look, this is what it's going to cost. Are you willing to add money to the budget? This is above and beyond what we have bid on doing. And we call that a change order. And that happens periodically. The main thing is open line of communication, being really direct, communicating if things are changing, and really weighing constantly, what does this additional money really equate to in the final product? Like,
Hmm.
is this X number of dollars worth 2 seconds of amazing footage? And in a 30-second spot, oftentimes it is. 2 seconds is valuable. Usually a 30-second spot is 15 2-second cuts. And so we're always kind of weighing that.
Right. So we are getting some questions, and by the way, if anybody wants to ask Corey a question, just use the little pop-up question box thing there as part of the GoToWebinar control panel, and then we'll fire these questions at Corey. And one just came in as like, what was the budget? Can you share that? Like, what
Ooh,
was?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. No, that actually is that is a confidential number.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
but what I think is valuable, what I would like to point out with a budget like this is um, this production in Hollywood, I think it's safe to say this might have been north of a $500,000 to $1 million, and
Wow.
it's safe to say that we came in a lot lower than that. And a lot of that is because we are living in an amazing time in terms of technology. We're using DSLR cameras. We shot this on Nikon D800s 2 or 3 weeks before they were released to the public. And for broadcast television, it looks pretty darn good. I mean, the resolution is incredible, image quality is incredible, and so I really feel like we collectively live in this time where the playing field has never been so level. We all have access to the tools at a baseline level that allow us to be creative and go out and shoot very compelling visual content, both still and
Right.
video.
How many days did it take to, from beginning to end?
We shot 4 days, so you're seeing 4 days of shooting in the field, big days, as I described, a lot of getting up an hour or two before sunrise and going to bed an hour or two after sunrise. We did 3 days of scouting in advance of the shoot, and that was 2 or 3 weeks in advance. We had a pre-production day in New Mexico, and I wish we had a post-production day on the tail end. It was pretty rough packing all the bags and getting everybody to the airport on their way out of town. So pretty tight timeline. I mean, we're talking about in total on the ground less than 8 days.
Right. Well, the next screen here is about, here we go, your video production rundown. And so it kind of like talks a bit about the process.
Right, right. I guess this is a bit of a laundry list of stuff that you want to be thinking about when you're working in the video space. And, some of it's just a different vernacular, a different language. We don't really show a portfolio in the video world. We show a reel. It's examples of your motion work. Every project starts with a proposal or a pitch. For a lot of us have transitioned from editorial work to commercial work, and now we're going from commercial work to motion work, leaving just the still world. And there's a level of client education. It turns out a lot of those same creatives that used to hire us to do still photography, now they're being told by their boss, and their boss is being told. Layers of management are saying we now need motion for the web, or we need motion for television. So there's a lot of client education that I'm learning is necessary in this transition from still photography to video or to motion. And that starts with understanding it yourself. Every project starts with an estimate, even if it's your personal project, even if it's you're going to go down the street every Saturday and shoot a piece about AYSO soccer games. It starts with really discipline yourself to understand what is the cost to you going to be. And it's a great exercise in building estimates for real jobs. We already talked about the production document and the importance of the concept or the summary. This idea of scripting questions. It's what are you going to be asking your subject, or what is that script going to be? Showing up prepared is the most valuable thing that you can do. It's the pre-production, the logistics. It's thinking about what you're going to encounter when you land. One of my best friends was the field producer on this job, Win Ruji, out of Los Angeles. He and I grew up together in the Antelope Valley and really fell in love with photography at the same time. And Win and Blaine in my office was our producer on the back end. They spent a lot of time talking about what we needed to be ready for in New Mexico. Everything from food to moving equipment to moving talent to making sure that we're in the right place at the right time, to make sure that we had contingencies if it were raining or if it were too cold. So a lot of it is planning, and I was involved with a lot of those conversations, just trying to prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Source and crew, we talked about that. Use the right people. I always try to surround myself with people that are smarter, more talented, more handsome, taller. The taller part's easy. I'm a pretty short guy. But that's really key. It's get the right people around you, whether that's just your assistant, whether that's your girlfriend or spouse out there helping you, or whether it's a real hired crew. Make sure you've got the right people around you. Assigning positions, leave nothing to doubt. There's no such thing as over communication in my book. I really try to go over the entire production in person or on the phone or in meetings in advance of even arriving on location, so that everybody knows what their role is and what the expectation is. Obviously, asset management, that's a whole nother can of worms, but we're really deliberate about redundancy of backup and keeping those assets organized in a way that makes sense in the aftermath. It's worth pointing out we did not, Novus Select did not edit this project. We actually managed the assets to the point that they were in logical folder structures, and then we shipped it to the agency, and the agency worked with a very talented editor out of the Bay Area. But editing is a big part of it. 50% of it is shooting, and the other 50% is making it come together in a timeline. So, my philosophy has always been, I'm not going to be the guy that's pushing the buttons, the expert on operating Premiere. Though I know Premiere, I really want to be the guy that's sitting behind the editor and thinking about the narrative and allowing them to do the technical work. So I'm always partnering with editors. Most
Were
of
you
my
there
edits
with them?
happen.
Like, were you there when they were doing it? Like, were you standing behind them, just like you said?
We did a couple of phone meetings. I looked at roughs, and then I made one trip to the Bay Area actually to sit with the editor and the creative team from the agency. So, and this was probably the least involved I've been with an edit in a long time. And part of it is there was less storytelling. This isn't a complex 22-minute documentary style story with voice, and so it worked quite well for me to be traveling at the same time. Now that's the other beauty of 2012 is we can review clips live. I mean, we can download on our iPhone a quick 30-second edit, get on the telephone and provide feedback to the editor. And that's really incredible. And we can remotely watch the timeline while the edit's taking place. So, it's incredible.
Hmm.
You don't need to be there. We've talked about voiceover. When you're negotiating with the client, it's very important that you define clearly how many revisions of the edit you're going to do. I think I was starting to say that most of the projects I work on tend to get edited through Novus Select, and you can go to novusselect.com. But one of the things my rep does and Novus Select, the project manager, does in a contract is define very clearly with our clients how many revisions they get. Because otherwise editing never ends. It just goes on and on and on. So that's something you just want to do to protect yourself. We define how we're going to deliver the content. Is it showing up on a DVD? In what formats is it arriving? Is it showing up on a hard drive? Is it for Europe? Is it for the United States? What resolution? Of course, the accounting and billing, that goes without saying. It's pretty important. And that also gets handled through the production company. Insurance, a lot of us were still photographers, and we learned that when we started shooting video, that $2 million liability policy that we have to do commercial gigs got a little more complicated. Once you're shooting video, the numbers go up. Turns out it's just a little riskier. The crews get larger, so we watched our insurance numbers go up. A good rule of thumb on a big commercial production is that when you look at the entire budget, usually insurance is between 2 and 4% of the entire budget.
Hmm.
And oftentimes that means taking out a rider policy specifically on that shoot.
So where do you go for insurance?
We use Tom Pickard and Company out of Los Angeles, and we've used them for years. They've been a fantastic, it's a farmer's policy, but managed through a group in LA that really handles a lot of still photography and video production work. And then finally, archiving. It's who's responsible for this content in the aftermath. Are we archiving it? Is the client and the agency responsible? And in my office, even if we don't agree to archive with the client, we archive anyhow because we want these assets for the future from a marketing perspective. And the truth is, storage is getting a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have a series of images to quickly run through and talk about the stories behind the images here. And
Great.
these are all frame grabs from right from the actual video.
And one other thing that's worth pointing out on this project is I was the director on this project, so I was tasked with creating the television spots. And it was the first time that I had been on a production where The agency had also hired a still photographer, and it wasn't me. And so it was a really unique situation to be in. It's that transition for me from still photography, exclusively still photography, to video. Matthew Turley was the still photographer, incredibly talented guy. And so Matthew and I definitely collaborated a lot in terms of this first shot is a great reminder. This was a location that Matthew found the day before when we were tech scouting. And we hadn't planned for this petroglyph to be in the TV commercial. But Matthew decided this was going to work better for him as a still photograph. So the first morning, and it was really chaotic, we split the teams into an A team and a B team. And I was with one of the camera crews, and Dane Henry went out with Matthew and his assistant. And Matthew, this was a very small space to work. There was like a 2-foot space that you could crawl into to capture this image. So Matt jumped in, the sun came up, he shot pictures for about 4 minutes, bracketed various compositions so that he could later do his compositing magic. And then Dane slid in with a slider. We had a little 2.5-foot or 2-foot pocket dolly from pocket dolly, and Dane slid in, did 2 or 3 moves, racking focus from the petroglyph to the background, and that was it. Like, there was our opening shot for the
Cool.
for the 30 seconds or for the 60-second spot. One of the things that the state of New Mexico really wanted to portray was that there was water actually in the state of New Mexico. People just believe it's arid and desert. And so we scouted actually a variety of rivers and lakes, and finally we settled on, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the reservoir, but it was really spectacular. However, the morning that we showed up to first of all, it's worth pointing out, this was winter. I mean, it was very, very cold when we were shooting these spots. Yet we were asking the talent to dress like it was summertime, because these are summer spots. So I think the morning that we were shooting on the water, there was actually icicles in the north-facing areas. And I think eventually we shot this. This was the female model in the couple, Rachel. Eventually we asked Rachel to wear a bikini top, and it was incredibly cold. So the spirit of the talent is really key.
Yeah, and there's the next shot of this one here.
Yeah, the spirit of the talent becomes even more important when you're asking them to splash 34-degree water on one another. It was Abiquiu Lake, by the way, and it's a really beautiful destination. Great trails, great water, great kayaking. But so one of the realities in shooting the water scene is that we want the camera to go into as many places as possible. So we actually brought a water housing, an Aquatech water housing, so that we could do exactly this, splash water on one another. When Rachel finally crawled out of this kayak, she was full body shivering from being in the water and just sitting in a puddle.
Oh my God.
One of the other things, one of the objectives was that we really wanted to mix culture, Native American culture, with these travelers, right? This is a family traveling through New Mexico, but we wanted them to interface with the Native American population. And so the 2 scenarios that we spent a fair amount of time working on was this very cool Native American dance sequence. But then we also did some classic pottery work where some of the women in the village actually worked with these young kids that were the family, the travelers, to make pottery. This was, a lot of this shoot it's sort of spontaneous. We didn't have the opportunity to tech scout this location at all. We had no idea where we would actually be shooting the pottery or the Native American dance. We rolled up to the location that morning. Myself, my producer, the 2 camera operators, we all rolled up an hour before the rest of the crew and before the client and before the agency, did a quick look around, made some quick decisions, and then we adapted. This is lit with, it looks like daylight. We have, actually there's some window light coming in from behind, and then we used 2 1x1 light panels to just balance that daylight and not affect the color. So we have window light in the back and then 2 light panels
I'm amazed with what you can do with these little light panel things now. I mean,
It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, one by one light panels. We had Anton Bauer batteries on the back, so we weren't tethered to cords. We were carrying a variety of light panels. Some tiny battery operated light panels. The one by ones were as large as we had on location, just mini portable stands. And it just makes you so adaptable and provides the ability to move so quickly. And it doesn't generate heat. That's the other
yeah.
beauty of the light panels. The room doesn't start cooking.
And then you can pack up your gear immediately when you're done.
That's it. That's it. There's no waiting around. We also shot at Los Poblanos, and I'm sure if there's anyone from New Mexico on the phone, I might have just butchered the name of this old ranch outside of Albuquerque. And part of what New Mexico has to offer, and in fact, I think it's safe to say the reason I accepted the job without hesitation is I knew we would be eating awesome Mexican food most of the trip. I think we had 3 burritos a day. That was our rule. But they're also known for cuisine other than just great burritos and Mexican food. And so this Los Poblanos, their chef is really famous for making meals where all of the ingredients either come from the farm or the ranch or within a very close proximity of the ranch. And so we did a quick prep sequence, again, daylight mixed with light panels in a pretty small kitchen. And then we transitioned directly from this scenario to shooting outdoors in a cool little outdoor dining scene. And again, the whole time we were struggling with, it was really, really cold. I mean, it was high wind. I mean, it turns out that time of year in Albuquerque or New Mexico in general, you get really high winds across the plains. And so, you can see Rachel here in her pink dress was quite cold. And in the background, we also did a lot of improvising. We used real people, all of the talent. They're not professional talent. We did a casting working with a local casting agent in Albuquerque, and we selected real people. They all had real jobs outside of being models. In fact, in most cases, this was their first opportunity to be in front of a camera, and they were fantastic. But then we would also, for extras, occasionally throw in our crew. You're seeing the back of Hoffa's head. She was our stylist, so she managed all of our clothing and wardrobe and props. And then, believe it or not, and if Dave is on this phone, that's our creative director, Dave Stanton, in the background, sipping his wine or maybe his water.
So, speaking of New Mexico, there's a great tequila bar called Maria's. Have you ever been there?
We heard some buzz about it, and in fact, when I heard that buzz, I thought of Hugh Grover being the aficionado.
And this is
So
again outside in the freezing cold.
yes, this was this
Oh
was
man.
this was really cold. I mean, we still haven't gotten to the coldest moment in the shoot for Rachel. I don't know why Rachel is always the one that does the most suffering. I think it's because we wanted to see skin. You want to see the female skin because it's summertime. But this was a really quick shot. We sourced this Jeep, actually. We put an ad in Craigslist, and we saw, I don't know, half a dozen kind of Jeep type options, and we wanted it to be beat up and used. We didn't want to rent something from the Avis lot. And quite frankly, we didn't have the budget to bring in the perfect prop car from Los Angeles. So we gave someone a few $100 and we drove their Jeep around for the 4 days that we were in New Mexico. Our second assistant, John drove this thing. He became very familiar with the gas gauge that didn't work. So he just had a philosophy that every moment he could fill the gas tank, he would stop and do it. We made a big decision for all of the shooting the vehicle that we did not have any type of a gyro stabilization device. We decided it was okay to feel very verite in style, very just kind of, it was okay to have the camera shaking. It was okay to be bouncing around. It felt more authentic. And I know Wynn, who I said produced this job, he's one of the experts in the automotive world. He's a very accomplished filmmaker and photographer in his own right. And I could tell he was cringing as he watched us shoot this car scene and some of the other car footage, because it was really just rough, but that it fit into the style of what the creative team wanted. That's Will. Just, again, every situation in that Jeep, I'm looking for as many visual opportunities as possible. I'm looking for visual diversity, break the scene down. I want wide shots, medium shot, detail shots. I want to show motion. I want to show faces. I want to show emotion. I want to show the landscape. This was one of those, we got lucky. We shot in a little town of El Rito, and there was this classic little diner where we shot a food scene where the family is being served some classic New Mexican food. And we wanted to hire some extras to be in the background. And they assured us, the owner of the restaurant, the son of the owner, assured us that when we showed up that morning, it would be no problem. He would just make some phone calls and half of this little town would show up. And and this was one of the guys. He's a local artist. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Very talented, accomplished artist, who also just looked the part. And so we had him, after we shot the dining scene, we walked across the street. There was this real cool, dilapidated kind of barn. And he leaned against the wall, and we built this whole scene around him waving at the couple as they drove by. And we shot it from 5 or 6 different angles. This whole sequence probably took less than 45 minutes, from shooting in the car, shooting across the road at the guy. I can't remember his name, sadly. But it's about building scenes. It's not just individual shots. It's building sequences when it comes to video.
And based on this next photo, it looks like you definitely did eat well.
This might have been the best taco that we had in New Mexico. Boy, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the restaurant. Too many weeks have passed, too many months since we did the shoot, but it's arguably some of the best New Mexican food in the state. This little restaurant, and it will come back to me possibly, has been written up a number of times in foodie type magazines, and made for some great visuals. And this is really what we're trying to capture. It's the essence of New Mexico. I described the Native American dance, incredibly cooperative group of folks that came out to dance for us. They did the buffalo dance, and they did it, of course, at sunrise. So it was incredibly cold. They got ready in a little building nearby, and I think there were about a dozen kids and adults out there dancing. And again, in this situation, we decided, I made a decision, where are the cameras going to be? In most cases, we had 2 D800s rolling simultaneously. One camera would be long lens, one camera would be wide. One of the secret weapons that we brought on this shoot was an RC helicopter. And at least in the edits that are on television now and online now, we didn't use any of the RC helicopter footage. But one of my favorite shots from this Native American dance scene was the RC helicopter flyover. Just really cool. It reveals from this cool adobe building, flies over the building, reveals the dancers, dust flying up from their feet, and then it reveals mountains in the background.
So what is an RC helicopter?
That's a remote control helicopter. It's an 8-bladed, essentially a drone, much like the military or police are using. But you can mount a camera on the bottom, D800 on the bottom of it, and the operator can control where the helicopter is flying, and then usually someone is aiding the helicopter pilot to control where the camera is pointing. And so you're monitoring the picture remotely on the ground.
Wow.
By the way,
it takes somebody like a special operator to do that, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does take someone who is a special operator. They need to really be a technical geek and love toying with screws and parts and electrical wire to keep the thing running. And it's a real discipline unto itself.
So you rented that?
We hired a helicopter operator, Michael Hagerdorn, out of Colorado, and he came with his 2 helicopters. So he had one that we used most of the time and one as a backup. And my experience with RC helicopters is that in the 3 shoots that we've used them, we've crashed 2 of them. So you want to make sure that your cameras are insured. And by the way, that restaurant, for those of you that are going to go to New Mexico, is El Farolito. Really amazing little restaurant. Add it to your list. It's world class.
And this was the from the llama scene.
Yes, this is in, there's a lot of story behind the story. And this is both the scariest story, but also the thing I'll remember most from our New Mexico shoot. We worked with, boy, his name was Stuart. And if you go to my blog, actually, if you go to news.coryrich.com, if you scroll down, I did a fairly decent write up of the shoot. And Stuart worked with us to provide llamas. He runs a llama company, llama guiding service in the state of New Mexico. And so we shot in this slot canyon, and we were combining locations. Wild Earth Llama Adventures is the name of Stewart's company. And so we were shooting on the Rio Grande for two reasons. One, there was a natural hot springs about a quarter of a mile off the road, and the single track trail that led up to the cars was a perfect situation for shooting the family with the llamas. And so the Secretary of Tourism for the state of New Mexico was about 8 months pregnant on this shoot and decided she was going to opt out of walking down to the hot spring, rightfully so. So she and a couple of other folks are sitting. We finished doing the llama shoot, really cute, fuzzy animals, and we ran down the hill to, in last light, shoot the hot springs scene. And while everyone was sitting at the cars, kind of, talking about the day and planning for the next day, Stewart hears some rock fall, sees some pebbles coming from above the canyon, rolling into like where the cars are parked. And Stewart, being a guy that spends, many, many days a year outdoors, instinctively knows that if there are little pebbles falling, there might be really large pebbles or boulders to follow. And so he shouts, "Get out of the way, move out of the way." And a couple of folks sitting on the bumpers of cars kind of, slowly turn their heads to look at Stewart, and he adamantly says, "Get out of the way," and shouts. And so they jump out of the way, and moments later, a boulder the size of a VW bug comes flying down the hillside and lands on one of the rental cars,
Whoa.
bounces, and lands. And you can see in this photograph between the daughter and the mom, there's a boulder. That's where the Secretary of Tourism was sitting, Monique, when the boulder landed on that and obliterated that boulder, split it into about a bazillion pieces, and then continued the down the way to the Rio Grande.
That is
And
awesome.
it was the closest, most unexpected possible death scenario on what should have otherwise been a tame uh, commercial shoot in the
Wow.
state of New Mexico. And so I'm to this day really relieved that we all came out alive.
Yeah. We have to get through. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about and only a few minutes left. So um, I actually like this scene. I totally related to that. That and then the scene where the person's hand was kind of like in the wind of the, with
Sure.
the Jeep. Jeep.
I think this might be my favorite scene in the spot. I remember in the scout, we saw this canyon, and I remembered being a kid and running through this slot canyon, pretending to fly. And so we just brought a little glide cam system. We probably shot this 12 times in a row at 60 frames per second. The instant we felt we had it, we called it and we started shooting other details. But yeah, I think it just brings you back to being a kid. And this
Those
is
slow motion, those shots that you have that are slow motion, is that those were done like the dancing of the feet, or when it's kind of, the close up of the feet as they're doing the buffalo dance is kind of in slow motion. Um,
Yeah, that's so one of the, the D800 and the D4 game-changing cameras for Nikon. And as a Nikon shooter, I still have a huge smile on my face because of those cameras. But they allow us to shoot at 24 frames per second, 30, and also 60. And when you shoot at 60 frames per second, but then bring that video footage into a 24 frame per second timeline, it slows the footage down. So that's what you're seeing in those dance scenarios and also in this slot canyon flying scenario.
what would be the difference between, like, why would you want to do, let's say, 24 frames per second versus 30? Is it just a different look?
It is a different look. 24 frames per second is very cinematic. It's what traditional film cameras in the movie industry always shot, and it has this cinematic feel to it. And 30 frames per second, on the other hand, has a very video feel to it, a much more of a television feel to it. And so I really gravitate toward shooting at 24 or 60. And I'm only going to 60 if I'm going to slow it down later, if that's the intent.
So is there, I mean, is there a reason why you'd want to do that in camera versus like just exporting it at 24 later?
It's very difficult. It doesn't have that same look when you start stripping frames out, right? You're losing frames. And so it's kind of like still photography. Try to do as much as you can in camera. One, because it saves you work later, and two, because you get better quality.
Right.
So do it in camera if possible. Make a conscientious decision in advance. So this is where Rachel wins the award. This water, it's quote unquote a natural hot spring, but I put my hand in and it felt like about 40-degree water. I don't know if it wasn't flowing. And I think if you look closely enough, you can see some big goosebumps on Rachel's body here. And it was really impressive. Like, I think if we had some Hollywood talent out here, she would have put her toe in the water and then given us the finger, because there was no getting in that water. It was really cold. And I bet in total she spent about 45 minutes in this water. I mean, by the end, I think she was borderline hypothermic. Like, could barely talk. Teeth were rattling. It looks cool, but the giveaway is there's no steam coming up, right? It was really cold. There was a hot tub just 10 feet out of the shot to the right that was pretty warm, but of course it wasn't quite as cool visually. So she won the award for suffering. Beautiful location. We wanted to have some kind of active activities. This was a jib shot. We had a 15-foot jib arm or crane arm that we used to really kind of reveal the background. You know, part of what amazed me with New Mexico is how varied the landscape was. It was really discovery. You know, one of my favorite things in this world in photography and video is just discovery. We get paid to go and see new places. And when I see a place like this, I can instantly envision the shot. Again, hiking scenario. It was very windy. We tried to set up the jib here, and it was gusting at about 60 miles an hour. And so in the end, a lot of this, by the way, is handheld. I mean, occasionally you see my mistakes where I'm rattling the camera, whomever was shooting the scene. But this was just a quick handheld shot. We were just trying to bang this stuff out, trying to make the most of the evening light. And I'm approaching it like a still photographer in these situations. Capitalize on the light, work the situation. This was really neat. Some ruins that the National Park Service allowed us to shoot in. We had no special access. We shot in the same places at the same time of day that the public could access. Maybe the one exception to that is the petroglyphs. We did pay the city to open the gate earlier, but we could have walked in. It was just a matter of trying to get our vehicles a little bit closer to the location.
Right.
And there it is, the graphic. I mean, we talked about the visual tools that we have to work with. This animation or this graphic was the only text that came up on screen. And by the way, this shot, you know, sometimes when you're scouting, when we were scouting at this location, I remember walking on the ruins and seeing our shadow across the way. I took a picture with my iPhone, and instantly that went into the mental note or into the shot list of this is going to be a picture. I want to see the whole family playing around this ruin with their shadows on the wall. And I wish I could take credit for knowing the moon was going to be out at about that time, but that was just sheer luck.
So of course, I watched the video, and we talked last week about this, and I watched the video, and first thing I want to know is, like, all right, you must have some ridiculous, insane gear list. And I said, can you please send me that gear list? Like, what did you use for this? And here it is, as predicted, just ridiculous.
Now, and let me say before I want to make it clear that there's a lot of gear on this list that we didn't use. For example, there's audio equipment that we had on location in case we needed it. Even though we were going into this project knowing there was no natural sound, I wanted the opportunity to change course along the way. There's a lot of redundancy. That's the other thing you're going to see in this list. 3 D800s, 2 D7000s, 1 D4. Did we use all of those cameras? No, we never used the D7000, we never used the D4, and we only used 2 of the D800s throughout the shoot. But I'm trying to prepare for the worst and hope for the best always. I
Right.
want to make sure that when the, excuse the expression, when the shit hits the fan, we can keep on working. If we
Right.
back over a camera bag and crunch some cameras, they fall out of the Jeep or off the roof, I just want to make sure it's going to work.
So, but then again, there's like for average folks like me who want to produce something that's halfway decent, there is like just a list of bare necessities, and you gave us that as well.
Yeah, look, at the
So,
at the core, I think at the core, we could go out and shoot the majority of this spot. Maybe that's a stretch. There's certain camera moves we couldn't do. But with this basic kit, Nikon D800, 70 to 200 2.8 lens, 17 to 35 2.8, a Manfrotto tripod with the fluid head, an ND filter, variable ND filter, and a microphone. In fact, we don't even need the microphone for this shoot. You
right,
could do a lot of this shooting. A lot of this happens with two lenses, one camera body, and a fluid head
right.
and an
We just
ND
got a
filter.
question. How much of that, the big list, how much of that was owned by you or versus how much of it was rented?
I would say, well, go back to that list for 1 second, if it's possible. Most of this equipment, I think it's safe to say I now own. And it's only because a lot of what I'm doing now is in the video world and I need that redundancy. Um,
Yeah.
but again, it's a stair step thing. The first video project I did, it was with a single Nikon D90, no tripod, and my still lenses. And the evolution has been I've bought a lot of these little bells and whistles and tricks and devices that allow me to kind of up the game. The helicopter I didn't own. Some of the equipment came from the other guys on the crew, Rex Lint, Dane Henry, uh, and it's always a little bit of a planning thing. Who's going to bring what? Because we're always trying to weigh how much we're traveling with, how many cases or bags of gear are we paying for to get from place to place. This is another. This sounds like a lot of gear, but the truth is, all of this fits in like a single big rental car. This is that game-changing world that we live in. We don't have a box truck or a grip truck on this location. It's two rental. I think we had a minivan, two minivans, and most of the gear fit into a single minivan, and the other minivan was to move people.
Right. So
So
would you say that's probably the reason you're using DSLRs as opposed to pro video cameras for this kind of stuff?
I would say
Smaller
two.
footprint?
Yeah, I would say smaller footprint. It's a form factor that I'm familiar with, and quite frankly, when you just look at straight quality, what are we trying to deliver to the client in the end? What is that quality bar, and how does that affect the budget? You would have been hard pressed to argue for using a higher end camera for this production. We wouldn't have gained that much. In fact, we probably would have lost. It would have slowed us down. The instant we went to a larger camera, it would have slowed the process down.
Hmm. All right. So it all comes down to three ingredients, right?
I think so. I don't know who said this. I'm going to say it's Brad Mansion because I mentioned him earlier. But whether whether it's video or whether it's still photography, or I think this might apply to anything in life. The question I get asked the most is, what does it take to make it work in this career path? And I say it's three ingredients. You need a little bit of raw talent. You need a lot of passion, and by that I mean you need to be willing to work hard. And it really helps if you're not an asshole, and that goes a long way.
Um, One other question we got a little bit ago, and then we can end this, close this up. Do you frame and compose images differently as a videographer versus a still image photographer? And to talk about the transfer of skills as a still photographer venturing into video work.
Yeah. I think it starts the same way. I think as still photographers, we refine what we see in a rectangle. We're responsible for that entire piece of real estate. Whether we flip that camera vertically or whether we hold it horizontally, we're paying attention to everything. What's happening in the corners, where the light is coming from, the composition, the moment, the layers, the foreground, the background, the midground, the framing. So it all starts the same way. It's what do we want to put inside of that rectangle? But then in motion, what's beautiful is that we can move the camera and the subject can move through our frame. And so it starts the same way. We want an interesting rectangle, but it's always vertical. Always horizontal rather when we're shooting video. But then where we have a lot of creative freedom is our ability to then dream about and anticipate and plan for, is the subject going to be moving through the frame? Is the camera going to be moving during this shot? And so I think it's an exercise. It's like any other muscle memory. The more you shoot still photos, it's like running around the track. The more you run, the better you get at running around the track. The more you shoot still photos, the better you get at it. Your body, your brain, your finger, you remember how to do it. You know how to get back into that state where you're creating interesting content.
Yeah,
And
you know,
video is no different. It's just practice makes perfect.
so I've noticed I've been trying to do videos myself, and I used to be a Nikon shooter in the film days, and then I bought a 5D, and then it focuses the different or the wrong way, you know. And so like I'm still
Right.
my at my core I'm still a Nikon shooter because it like I just default to wanting to focus the other way. But I think a lot of people are having a challenge in trying to figure out like how to go from autofocus in the still world to manual focus in the video world, and how do you manage that where people are seeing your focus, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a really good question, Grover. I mean, I think just yesterday, a non-professional photographer friend of mine called for advice. And by the way, I do a lot of fielding photography and video questions for my family and and friends. And his question was, hey, I just bought this Nikon D7000, but the damn thing doesn't autofocus that well in video. And I had to explain to him that yeah, that function's really not designed to work so well. In video, we always manually focus. Um, and the reality is you're planning for where you want your subject and if they're going to be in focus. So oftentimes we use the expression we're pulling focus. We're follow focusing manually. It's like going back to the 80s, right? Pre
Yeah.
1984 Olympics when autofocus rolled out. We have to manually focus when we shoot video on DSLRs. There's pretty sophisticated rigs that you can buy, Zacuto, Red Rock, a number of these rigs that allow you to follow focus or help follow focus. But it's about embracing finding your focus through the back of the camera or through a viewfinder or through a monitor. You can get sophisticated and mark points on your lens and mark points on the ground so that you know where they're going to go. And I'd be lying if I didn't say there's a lot of out of focus shots that I shoot, and that's why you shoot a lot.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time. I want to bring up, and because Corey's going to be here as one of the special guests, Luminance. If you haven't heard of it yet, we at PhotoShelter we created Luminance to ask a simple question: how is photography changing, and how is society responding to that change? And this is a totally fresh new conference that is bringing leading voices from across all different parts of the industry. It's a 2-day conference, has 24, I think, 24 presenters from organizations that are really currently making a pretty good mark on photography world today. It's kind of like the TED for photography, and some of the speakers, Eric Chang, you know him, Eric Chang from he's the
Not
director of
personally.
photography at Lightroom.
Yeah,
He's
no,
like
certainly knows work.
totally amazing underwater photography, and now he's working at Lytro. You know that camera that like allows you to focus like after the fact. It's pretty
Right.
wild. Of course, Joe McNally, everybody knows from contract photographer for Sports Illustrated, Life, and National Geographic. Robert Seal, oh, good friend Robert Seal, from Houston. And But what makes Luminance, I think, different is that it's not just a bunch of photographers, you know, showing their images and saying, "Hey, hey, great, I'm a great photographer," and I. It goes a lot deeper with people who are really changing the industry, like, and I can't say, I don't know, it's Nirvana's Nayarana. I actually practiced this name beforehand, but he's the guy who manages the engineering team for photos and videos at Facebook. John Maloney, who's the CEO of Tumblr, and Eileen Gittins from the CEO of Blurb. So these are like big decision makers really that are impacting us. So it's not just a photographer dig me show. And Anybody who wants to go, it's in New York City, September 12th and 13th. You can get $50 off by the registration by entering the promo code CoreyRich at photoshelter.com/luminance/register. So everybody's looking forward to seeing your presentation, Corey, at Luminance.
Well, thanks, Grover. That was fun, and I hope. I mean, I guess the parting thing that I would say is, if you're afraid of video, the easiest thing you can do is just actually flip the switch and try it. It's not that scary, and in fact, it's pretty darn fun. And once you get bit by the bug, I've learned there's no turning back.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and thanks
Thanks.
everybody for hanging in there.
Thanks, Grover.